I've been a little nervous about something because this has not been boiled. There's a few of you have chickens around here, and different ones we've gotten eggs through in different times. The Allards, they have some chickens. Did you know that not all eggs are white? They come out all kinds of different colors and speckles and all of that. Brendan, come on up here for a second, would you? Do you mind? Just say, nah, I'll come on up here. Yeah, up here. Get used to it. You'll probably be preaching one day, right? Lots of days, maybe. You never know. Or that girl you're engaged to, she's quite a preacher, I hear. So, I was going to ask you to hold that. Yeah. You put that in your hands like this, just carefully. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm kidding you. I won't do that. I'm messing with you. Here, give it back to me. That's it. I'm really kind of done with you. Oh, wait. Here, catch. I'd have been cleaning something up. Thanks so much. Good hands. You can sit down. Can you spot the real thing? Kind of hard to do from a distance, isn't it? Can you spot the real thing? I mean, the shape, even the color. I've seen eggs that color, variations of it. Can you spot the real thing? Do you ever see, how many of you have fake fruit in your house? Some of you are turning around looking at your mom. I think we do. I love this. Now the parents are having a discussion. That's not fake. Yeah, it is. I didn't know it was real. Yeah, we have fake fruit. Hey, Mom, don't we? I love that. That's great. How many of you have fake fruit somewhere in your house and it has teeth marks in it? How many of you have ever been fooled by some fake fruit or flowers? How many of you gone up and smelled a flower and you realize, oh, that's not real? Sometimes it's hard to tell. I want to read you something here. We're going to look at something Jesus taught. And some things that Jesus taught, he showed and displayed a lesson as if it was in a 3-day series to his disciples. He would do something, say something, they would watch it, they would hear it, and then a day or two later, he would do something somewhere else, and then he'd go back to the lesson, or we get the privilege of looking and saying, within the context, this is what he did. Look at this just a little later in the chapter, the next chapter. Boy, there's a common thread here of something he's saying to us. And that's something we're going to look at this morning that Jesus did. In Mark chapter 11, give you a little backdrop here. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and he's on his way. They're going to celebrate. He's going to celebrate Passover with his disciples, and then it's his triumphal entry, and he's going to lay down his life on the cross for you and I. This is the backdrop of this. So in chapter 11, if you look at verse 1 and 2. It tells where he's at. When they drew near Jerusalem to Bethpage and Bethany. Can you say Bethany? We're going to come back to that in a little bit. At the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, now watch this. Jesus says to them, go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord has need of it and will send it back here immediately. And guess what? They went. And it was just like Jesus said it would be. You can read it there. It's just like he said it would be. Now, on the following day, verse 12, on the following day, when they came from Bethany, say that again, Bethany, he was hungry. You ever been there? How about, is anybody hungry right now? You are. Well, hang in there. This is only about an hour and a half. No, I'm messing with you. That's not true. I'm messing with you. He was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf. Now, that's important. Those two words, in leaf. A fig tree in leaf. He went to see if he could find anything on it. Remember, he's hungry. He'll just kind of snag a few figs if they're there. A little something to hold him over. When he came to the fig tree that was in leaf, he found nothing but leaves. Ooh. You and I, it's kind of like this. You know what? I think I'm going to make a piece of toast and have a little peanut butter on it. We're back to peanut butter. Yeah, I talked about that a while back. Put the bread in, it's toasted, pops up, go get the jar of peanut butter. You know, I wish they'd come up with something, that different than the butter knife, and then you've got all these little pieces that where the knife didn't go for the last person who used it and put it away practically empty. Now, that doesn't really happen in our house anymore because our kids are gone. Amen. Who said amen? Amen. But it's hard to take that knife and do this little. I know some of you are saying, if you take a spatula, Pastor, let me figure this out for you. I get it. But it's just like, there's the jar of peanut butter. Hey, I'm going to have peanut butter. And there's nothing in it. It's that kind of thing that Jesus is going through here. He's hungry, sees a fig tree in leaf, because whenever this was, fig trees, it wasn't really in season. And I want you to know, fig trees, they lose their leaves. They're kind of like a deciduous tree. Drop their leaves. You didn't know I knew the word deciduous, did you? Ooh, pastor knew a word, a nickel word. Yeah, drop their leaves. It's common. And then, of course, as the seasons change and new leaves bud and come out, well, here's this olive tree in leaf. He's hungry, and he goes over to check it out, and there was nothing on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard that. From there, Jesus goes, and it says they came to Jerusalem. They kind of made it there, and he entered the temple, and he began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, Is it not written, God, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. You see, they show up at the temple, and it's busy with people. It was a time where people were coming to Jerusalem. They were making their travels. It was part of their heritage and their faith to come. And they were going to worship God. And they were doing some things there that had nothing to do with true worship. In fact, they were oppressing, without going into great teaching about this, they were oppressing many, including Gentiles who became Jewish, or they came to worship God, and other Jewish people who came to worship, and they were being taken advantage of by some of those who were selling them sacrifices so that the people could make sacrifices. And Jesus is watching this. Now, if you walked and you saw the temple, and the synagogue, and it was busy and a lot of people. It just looks like, wow, what an event. A lot of people have come to worship God. They must really believe in him. Some of them have traveled a long way. Obviously, their faith must be really sincere. There's all these signs, all this busyness, all this involvement. We find out it's like a fig tree that has leaves, but there was no fruit. You see, Jesus is teaching, he's doing this teaching. He goes and he has this fig tree and he curses it because it didn't have figs. And he showed up. To that fig tree, Jesus showed up unexpectedly. And I want you to remember how he comes. His announcement that he's coming has already been made. But we don't know the day or the hour. We don't know the hour of the bridegroom, do we? We're supposed to be ready. We're supposed to live ready. Yeah. Every moment. With a readiness in our heart for the rapture or for his return. That readiness. And to continue to obey and continue to occupy and continue to bear fruit. So that when he comes, we would not be lost or under the curse of sin that we didn't repent from. So Jesus, hungry, goes to the fig tree, doesn't have fruit. He shows up in Jerusalem, and there's busyness. It's like a fig tree with leaves. But Jesus goes, and he doesn't see fruit. And I want you to know, in the Old Testament, the fig was used as an example of God's people, Hebrews, Jewish people. It was used as a physical representation to be a part of describing their spiritual walk and spiritual faith in God. A fig was used. You'll find it, one of the Old Testament references, 1 Kings chapter 4:25, it says this: each man will dwell under his own vine and fig tree. See, a vine and a fig tree, those things together talked about prosperity. It talked about peace. It talked about abundance. That's how that's looked at. And so it's this example to describe relationship with God and his relationship with them, and a restoration and a redemption and a time of peace and a time of abundance and a time of fulfillment, a time that we all seek with the Lord. And I want you to know that we can have that with him. We don't have to wait for an event. It's being fruitful. You look at what's happening in the temple, and it wasn't true worship. Because true worship, it bears fruit. You and I this morning, we gather in this place. People can drive by and they see the parking lot filled with cars on a really cold and snowy morning here in Wisconsin. And they make some assumptions. Make some assumptions about you here. This building, or what they call the church. And we know the church is its people, not the building. And they make some assumptions. Because every once in a while I hear something from somebody in the community. Oh, you're the pastor up at the church on the hill, or by the family restaurant, or by the interstate. And say, I went by there was a lot of cars. Or I went by there and it was a day during the week, and they said, what was going on during the week? There was a bunch of cars in your parking lot. They make some assumptions about it being full. It looks like there's something going on. They would expect that there's probably some fruit here. But Jesus is making this question in this parallel. Is it just leaves? Does it look like it's bringing forth fruit? Or is it just leaves and no fruit? And this isn't passing judgment on this church. This is just the teaching of Jesus that you and I need to pay attention to in our personal life because we're part of the church. And it's not so much that I'm concerned as the pastor about when people drive by and, we look like we're really lively. I mean, I want that, but we desire fruit, right? That's what Jesus is looking for. Upon his return, his unexpected return, he's looking for fruit. He's not just looking for something with leaves. Those of you who garden, those of you who have an orchard, I mean, we live in rural America. You get this, you know. Man, those tomato plants look really good. What's with the no tomatoes? You think, oh, well, come on, there's got to be some tomatoes. I'm going to tell you something. I took a tomato plant and brought it up to where we set our camper. Just stays there. And on the little deck I built outside the camper, brought a tomato from here. Same tomatoes that grew here and got big and bent over and had lots of fruit on them. This thing grew taller than me. I have pictures of it. I should have brought it. Taller than me. Not one tomato. Not even like there's a tiny little green tomato. No tomatoes. This thing, it was taller than me. Now, it wasn't super full, but, it had plenty of branches. And I pruned that thing, too. I didn't just plant it and say, water, and, well, here you go. You're on your own. Whenever I'd go up there, I'd prune at the beginning and water it and make sure it was moist and, make sure it was in a spot that didn't have canopy, kind of sun. No tomatoes. Kind of disappointing. I was kind of thinking I would, you're up at the camper, you're going to cook out and have hamburgers, and I'm going to have a tomato on my hamburger. Well, I did, but the tomato came from Walmart. Took the tomato, talked to the plant. See? This is what you're supposed to do. Jesus starts with this fig tree, and the disciples heard him. And then they watch, as we see in the scriptures. There was a time lapse here, but we get the next thing, is Jesus arrives and goes to the temple in Jerusalem, where people have come to sacrifice and worship God. And he starts turning over the tables of the money changers and says, you defiled my Father's house. This is supposed to be a house of prayer. House of worship. And he found no fruit. And the disciples, they're not catching it yet because the explanation comes. If we go back, the explanation comes. And in the morning, they passed by and they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered them. And he begins to teach them about faith. Remember Bethany? Say it. Bethany. Now, Bethany, the actual meaning of that word is house of figs. A place that should be fruitful, a place that should be abundant. And in the Hebrew understanding, in ancient Hebrew, is, hey, a place of figs. That was always something that had to do with abundance and prosperity in our relationship with God, a spirituality. You see, Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and he didn't find fruit, just like he didn't find it on a fig tree. That fig tree representing God's people. They were busy and it looked right, but there was no fruit. You see, Jesus can recognize the real thing, right? Recognize the real thing. Now, I didn't ask Brendan, is it a real egg or not? But I'm guessing that he kind of thought it was because he made great effort to catch this. And he did. After a bounce or two. Yeah. Jesus can recognize the real thing. That should bring a great sincerity to my faith and working out my faith with him. You see, I'm the pastor of a church. I'm spiritual. A nice building. Wore my suit today with a tie. All leaves. How about you? Do we talk and give the impression and indication that we worship God or we're full of fruit? You see, fruit is found. It's shown up. You can find it. Fruit isn't something that's supposed to be just talked about. It shows up in our life. Coming this morning or live streaming, is it leaves for you or is this fruit for you? Look what happens here in John chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany. Came to Bethany, house of figs, a place of abundance, a place of fruit, a place of celebration, a place of fulfillment, a place of growth. He comes to Bethany where Lazarus was. Remember Lazarus? What happened to Lazarus before this? He died. Jesus traveled 3 days. By the time he got there, it was the fourth day. And Jesus calls out, and Lazarus is raised from the dead. Now that's fruit. Bethany, a house of figs, a house of prosperity. Jesus, he goes to Bethany and he shows fruit. He shows figs. It can't be hidden. It can't be taken away. I mean, they tried to, after all of this, the religious leaders, they were so envious and jealous of this because they were filled with leaves but no fruit. Jesus shows up, not only has leaves, but has fruit. Shows up that God can do this, that God has power, that God came to save, God came to deliver, that Jesus, his son, is the resurrection and the life. Real fruit. The religious leaders, they didn't like this. They didn't like that he raised Lazarus from the dead. I would think that when people are raised from the dead, you're pretty happy unless it's your mother-in-law. No, I'm kidding you. Oh, come on, laugh with me. Not my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law. Listen, if somebody gets raised from the dead, I'm suggesting that you're wow, right? I mean, the death certificate's already written. The ink is dry. And they come back to life. Woo-hoo! Well, guess what? The religious leaders weren't that happy. It talks about not only did they want to make a plot against Jesus, but they wanted to kill Lazarus because people were coming to see him. Now, Jesus, in this place of fruitfulness, Bethany, where Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus, so they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of this perfume, this very expensive perfume. Now, Judas Iscariot. Who's Judas? Oh, you said traitor, but what was he before he was, a disciple, a treasurer? Yeah, he was the guy who held the money bag for the disciples and the contributions and that. But he was a disciple. Now, wouldn't you think, if you were a disciple of Jesus, you would kind of have the expectation, because every indication would say that, hey, they follow Jesus. Jesus does all this marvelous teaching. He does all these great things for people. He is a prophet. He might be the Messiah, some were thinking. Some said he is the Messiah. But all is good. So he has his disciples who he selected. Obviously, they're going to become like him because that's what disciples do. Uh-oh. Judas. So they're here, and Mary does this with this expensive perfume. But Judas, one of the disciples, who would have, he's traveling with the group. He looks like the rest. You would expect good to come from him predominantly, right? Just like you would expect that of other disciples. Just like people expected from you and I. How disappointed they are when they find no fruit. I mean, come on. If we didn't know the outcome of Judas and this was just unveiling it for the first time, we would think, oh no. Judas, no. You're a disciple. And this is what Judas says. The fragrance fills the room. She's worshiping Jesus. And Judas, one of the disciples, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now that sounds really justifiable, doesn't it? In human thinking, like, this is really nice, but this could have made money. And not only that, the money could have been given to the poor. Lord, if you would just make me rich, I promise I would give it away and there could be so much good done. You ever pray that prayer? Keep your hands down. Judas has sounded really noble here. Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And he had charge of the money bag, and he used to help himself to what was put in it. Jesus replied and says, leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. This was an act of worship to Jesus, that she anointed him, wiped his feet with her hair. See, I want you to know Bethany, a house of figs, a place of worship. You see, Jesus found true worship there in somebody's home, and there was fruit there. And yet he goes to the temple, and it's only leaves. It's like a fig tree that had leaves with no fruit. Can you and I spot the real thing? And Jesus can. And I want to be careful when we say, can you spot the real thing? Because we're not really supposed to go around saying, is there any fruit in your life? Is there any fruit in your life? And, we're passing judgment on you. It's about right here. For you, it's the person in your shoes today and the person sitting in your seat today. And yet, in the place where it's called the house of figs, there was a Judas. A place right in the presence of real worship. Right in the presence of real fruit. There is Lazarus who was dead and now he's alive. Right there with real worship, real prayer, real adoration of Jesus. Right there with real fruit, Lazarus raised from the dead. There's Judas. Nothing but leaves. You and I, we come to a house of what we call a house of worship. Is it possible in the midst of some real praise today and some real fruit that alongside it there might be a chance that there's just leaves in my life? See, don't fool ourselves because we were in the presence of real praise and worship and real fruit of the kingdom around us, and we might call this our home church. Don't be fooled by that. When we come to the place of assessing and judging our own self. You see, right in the middle of a field that can be planted with wheat, the enemy came and planted some tares or some weeds among it. Do you remember that? You see, right here in the presence of this place, just like the temple where he turned the tables over, just because there's activity and because we're involved in the activity and we're around, don't be fooled that means that there's fruit. You and I need to pay attention to what Jesus took days to teach his disciples. He watched them. They heard him. Then they see him do this, and this whole message together is about when he comes, will he find fruit in our lives? Would you stand up with me, please? There's something called going through the motions. And the motions can be the same between two people. And yet, by the eye of the Lord, he's looking for fruit. Am I bearing fruit? Are you bearing fruit? The fruit of character. Gotta love kids. I'll tell you what, children are a blessing from the Lord in many ways. And one of the ways that the children are a blessing is they create accountability for the parents. Because the children see how you talk and live in the privacy of your life. And then they also see you at church. Is it leaves only? Or do they see fruit coming out of your life? In the privacy of your life? Do they watch you during the week? My kids watch me during the week? Did I teach them or tell them how to lie? And yet they see me at church? And they see me preach? They hear me talk here? Was it just leaves? They said, man, there's no fruit. I mean, I see the old man at home. See, children are a beautiful gift from the Lord for accountability for you and I as adults. Close friends. Ones who they get a glimpse in here. Is he just leaves? Is there fruit in there? Am I watching people eat of the fruit of God in my friend's life? They come to him or come to her and they're nourished they went, whatever it is through their life, and hung on to God, and fruit's been displayed, and people come and eat of it. They're nourished. Something good happened for somebody else because of the fruit in their life. You ever watch somebody make great claims? And then when you watched them, it didn't match. See, we don't have to talk about fruit. People see it and find it. Let other people talk about your fruit. Let them talk about it. You don't need to talk about your fruit. Other people. It means it was really there. Let them brag about you. Let them talk about your faith. Let them share what they have seen. That means they have seen fruit in you. I mean, isn't that how Jesus did it? He went about doing good. People saw it. People were healed. People watched him. And he wasn't just hanging out with the important people. He took time for little kids. He took time for the broken, the lost, the sinners, and gave them hope, spoke words of life. And because of that, other people recognized it, and they followed him. See, Jesus, he's loaded with figs. Some are just loaded with leaves. So disappointing to have a tomato plant over 6 feet tall. No tomatoes. I wonder how disappointing it is for the world or the lost to look at us who proclaim to be a fig tree. Followers of Jesus. And yet they watch us conduct ourselves. They say, I don't see any figs on that tree. God, He can see the real thing. And He can see a fake. We're supposed to judge ourselves. We're supposed to judge ourselves. Not somebody else. We're supposed to judge me. I wonder if my life makes that sound. What sound does your life make? He's gracious, He's merciful. He wants you to be fruitful. He's got a plan for you. Surrender to the Spirit of the Lord. We know the fruits of the Spirit. We know Galatians 5. If you don't know me, go to Galatians 5. It talks about the fruit of the Spirit. All these character virtues that the Spirit has that He lives in us and He's supposed to bring forth. So to the Spirit, not to the flesh.